Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Art of Tracking radio show. Tracking is still alive and well. Join us as we interview master trackers from around the world. We'll hear their stories, their secrets. So tune in and enjoy all you hear. Welcome. Hello, everybody. My name is Steve.
This is Garth.
And today we have a very special guest on. She will be introducing and talking about a recent recording that they did at the Buckeye Gathering. This is great stuff. Dr. Nicole Apelian is with Ecotours International. She's a researcher, expedition leader, safari guide. She is a Southern Africa specialist. She's a mother, a scientist, an educator, and she has a doctorate in cultural anthropology. How's it going today, Nicole?
It's going well. Thanks for the introduction, Steve.
This is great stuff. We are very glad to have you on here and have the time, take the time out to talk about this recent recording. So you spend a lot of time over there in Africa, and you said you might be going back. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I've been working there, actually it'll be 20 years next year, in 2015. I first moved to Botswana in 1995, postgraduate school for my master's in biology, and moved over and joined the Peace Corps and spent a couple of years working as a game warden for the wildlife department there. And loved it so much I decided to stay on, and myself and another researcher started a lion research project that was a 10-year studying genetics and reproduction and disease and ecology of the big cats. And when that ended and I moved back to the States, all I could think of was Botswana. So I started my own company to guide mostly wildlife safaris. And over the years that switched, and I became more interested in Bushman culture and Bushman society, and been working for a long time now with tracker John Young and with the Bushmen of Botswana, most specifically the Naro Bushmen in the Western Kalahari, who are sort of arguably the best trackers in the world. And now I take people over, and we do a lot with bird language and tracking and animal communication and wildlife tracking in general, and also a lot with culture and learning from the society of people who this particular community is really living very similarly to how their ancestors did, 40,000 years ago. So it's a really wonderful opportunity for people to experience, and for me it's just a blessing to be able to work with people who are so connected to the land and connected to nature and to each other.
Yeah, and thanks for letting us use this recording. And this was taken from the Buckeye Gathering, is that right?
That's correct, in May.
Great.
So what all happened out there? How was the essence and spirit of that whole gathering?
The Buckeye Gathering is an amazing gathering. I love going to primitive skills gatherings. My kids and I go to 4 or 5 a year, and I was teaching down at the Buckeye Gathering, which is in Northern California, end of April, early May this year. And they were wonderful enough to host a talk for me down there. And the people, it was a large gathering of about 500 people, and who are all really excited about learning primitive skills, traditional skills, and there's a lot of wonderful exchange and really amazing leaders and teachers down there. And a lot of the students who go are leaders and teachers in their own rights as well. And the atmosphere down there was really, it was run very well. It was run by some people who are very connected to a lot of the work that John Young does and the 8 Shields work. And they put that model on top of the gathering itself. And it was a really wonderful experience to be able to share what I'm doing over in Botswana, and to be able to bring that back to people who really had a yearning to hear the stories and a yearning to hear what's going on in this culture that a lot of people really wish we still lived in and that they could emulate.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks so much for sharing it with us and letting us spread it on the radio here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate getting the word out about what's going on.
Well, we know you're a busy lady, Miss Nicole, so we'll let you go. And once again, we appreciate you letting us share this with everybody, okay?
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great talking to you both, and hope you have a beautiful day.
Great. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. If at some point you can't say, I can't hear you. Okay. Thanks for introducing me, Dave. My name's Nicole Apelian. I've been working in Botswana for almost 20 years, and for the past 6 years, been working really closely with a community of Naro Bushmen, and I'm going to talk about that tonight. Tonight I'm going to talk about the history of the Bushmen, what's been going on in their culture, what their current situation is, and I'm going to tell some stories and talk about their life ways. And there'll be plenty of time for questions after, but if you have something that really is burning, you have to ask it, go for it. You may have my capote. Okay. So I started working in Botswana, as I said, close to 20 years ago, and I went there originally just I'll often get asked, how did you end up in Botswana? Why are you working with the Bushmen there? And I started out in 1995, post-grad school, a couple years. I joined the Peace Corps, and I got this great gig working for the Department of Wildlife and National Parks as a game warden in Botswana. What a great Peace Corps assignment. Yeah, joined the Peace Corps. Woo! And after that ended, I had so fallen in love with the people and the land there that I decided to stay. And I started with a researcher from East Africa. We started a lion research project that lasted for 10 years in the Okavango Delta of Botswana, looking at ecology, evolution, genetics, reproduction of those big cats. Currently, I do a lot of work in Botswana, you'll hear about tonight. I also teach at Prescott College. I teach in their adventure ed program. Got a few master's students there right now, and I really enjoy it. But when I came back, when I moved back to the States, I missed Botswana. I just missed being in the bush. And when I was living there, I guided on the side when I was doing the lion research because it was fun, and the research grant really paid for the research, but not so much for anything else. So I was I'd done a lot of wildlife guiding, and I decided to start a company called Ecotours International to be able to go back there and share my passions with other people. And we do something called transformative or wisdom travel. And what I'm going to talk about here is specifically the time with the Bushmen. We focus on, here's John Young, as many of you know John. He'll be back down, I think, in a minute. John and I go over and we guide expeditions there that are really journeys. They focus on tracking, primitive skills, a lot with bird language, and the idea of cultural mentoring. I'm also currently, and this is what's really exciting me right now, working on an ethnobotanical field guide of Bushman plant uses. It's so wonderful. The elders in this community, this is a draft copy, and every time I bring over a draft, the women just drag me to some new plants that I haven't seen yet. They're so excited about it. The elders asked if I would help them to get down their indigenous knowledge because there's so many breaks that are happening in their culture now. They've been really worried about losing that knowledge. So the guide will entail traditional, edible, and medicinal uses of plants of the Kalahari. And every time I go back, there's some plant we've never seen before that only comes up every so and so many years. So there's so much knowledge there. And I'll talk a little bit later about how that knowledge is transferred and the effect of our going over on that knowledge. It's had a very positive effect on that. I also work with another Bushman tribe called the Jugansi, and this is them. Very different from the Bushmen. They are very different dress. They wear a lot of beads, but otherwise very similar patterns. And when they heard I was working on a book with the Naro Bushmen, they got really excited. And so now I'm bringing the Jukansi knowledge in as well. And hopefully I'll be adding a couple more tribes soon as well. So, yes. I can't believe it hasn't been written down yet. It's like, really? Really? How could no one have written that down? All right, so where are we? Botswana is located in South Central Africa. So South Africa's here, Botswana's right here, Namibia's to the west, and Mozambique, Zimbabwe to the east. The area I work is mainly in this area. Botswana is a landlocked country. It's semi-arid desert. It is a very large country. It's about the size of Kenya or Texas or France. And compared to Kenya, which has a population of almost 50 million, Botswana has fewer than 2 million people in an area the same size. About 35% of the country is set aside for wildlife. It's got a very good conservation record. All of these areas are very large parks. This one's the size of Denmark. And then around that are wildlife areas that are for photography and have been in the past for hunting, and they just banned that, but it might be coming back again. But most of the population lives right here. And so the rest of this is very open. Semi-arid Kalahari Desert, high desert area. Now, although they have a very good wildlife conservation history, they do not have a very good history with land conservation as far as Bushmen go. And I'm going to go into that today about government, land loss, and the effect it's had on the Bushmen. So Botswana, when it was first formed, was formed as a non-racial state. It was really in backlash to apartheid that was going on in South Africa. Botswana got independence in 1966, and then they discovered diamonds. And what they decided to do, what their government decided to do, is said that tribal affiliations play no part. So unlike what South Africa is now doing as the Rainbow Nation and lifting up, I think they have 11 national languages, lifting up difference, what Botswana decided to do was the exact opposite of that. They said everybody's going to be equal. But by equal, their government had all this colonialism that was thrown at it. They had internalized that imperialism. And what happened is the Botswana government said everyone must modernize. Everyone must be as Western as possible. We are going to bring those cultures up. And what happened is land claims, when the country got independence, land was being grabbed by everyone. And the Bushmen, of course, they don't claim land. They don't technically own land. And they also had no rights. They were considered serfs, bottom of the class, scum. And so they got zero land allocated to them. So when this land clash happened, they were left landless. And they were forced to live in settlements if they wanted to be to live in a place. And so they had no personal property of their own. There are many different tribes of what we call Bushmen. Now, some people think of Bushmen as a pejorative term. The group I work with likes to be called Bushmen. You hear the word San, you hear the word Khoisan, you hear Basarwa, which is what they're called in their own country, which means people of no value. So they've been very marginalized over time. But there's many different tribes of Bushmen. And the area we work here is this area here with the Naro. The one you've probably read about the most are the Jukansi Bushmen, also called the Kung Bushmen. And that's what's been written about, like Elizabeth Marshall Thomas and The Old Way, and those books take place here. But a lot of overlap.
Is that Misa too?
Yes, same tribe. Mm-hmm.
What is it?
Now, I was saying the government of Botswana, they seem to value homogeneity and refuse to acknowledge any diversity within their own boundaries. Their idea of helping the Bushmen is total assimilation into their culture, the Bantu or the Tswana culture, and total modernization. The past president said this: how can you have a Stone Age creature in the age of computers? If the Bushmen want to survive, they must change. Otherwise, like the dodo, they will perish. And this is pervasive in Botswana. So very quickly, the San Bushmen in southern Africa are losing 40,000 years of indigenous knowledge. They're bleeding indigenous knowledge. This is due to colonization, modernization, assimilation, land loss, marginalization, hunting loss. There are huge gaps in generational knowledge now, especially as people move from their homelands into settlements where they're being forced into. And a lot of my research when I did my doctoral research focused on how indigenous knowledge can be perpetuated and strategies around that. And the strategy that I'll talk a little bit about tonight is something I call restorative ecotourism. Restorative meaning that it actually gives back to the community and helps that indigenous knowledge perpetuate from generation to generation, versus a lot of tourism which is harmful, very, very harmful, sort of looky-look tourism, and very harmful to communities. Okay. As I said, they're deeply marginalized, and one of the things is economic opportunities are really few. They have weak representation in political arenas because they don't have any schooling and they're unable to advocate for themselves. And they're subject to a lot of social discrimination and prejudice. And when I talk about economic opportunities, I'm going to get into this later of why that's necessary now. You might think they don't need money. But with hunting bans and things that have been pulled apart from them, they actually need to sort of fill that area in other ways. As a culture, they've always been, I look up, all these people are really good friends of mine that are in this slideshow. This is Komakai. It's just hard not to introduce them as they come along. So this is Komakai. And as a culture, they've always been, of course, very dependent on land for their livelihoods. However, since much of their land's been reappropriated for other uses, now many of them are relying on food rations for sustenance in the settlements. There is going to be a story of hope in here, I promise you. It's not all negative, but the history is quite tragic. There was a mass extermination of Bushmen. One of my dear friends, who's a guide over there, he grew up with the Bushmen. He's an Afrikaans man who grew up in northern South Africa, and he remembers when they would round up the Bushmen. He remembers his great-grandfather and his grandfather, and he's in his 30s, his grandfather going out by horseback and wiping out entire clans of Bushmen. They were legal to hunt until 1936.
Oh my God.
In 1936, this is the last permit that was given in Namibia, which was then run by South Africa. There's a Bushman woman, Bushman Frau, for 400 rand. The same cost as 2 eland for a Bushman woman.
What's an eland?
An eland is a very large antelope. It's cow size. And it's a cow-sized antelope that can jump like 4 meters in the air from standing. Like, it really can. I've watched an eland at a watering hole stand there and get annoyed with the wildebeest that were all around and jump over them just to get away. They're very good at going over fences and very highly prized, actually, because they're extremely fatty. Yep. This is a sort of classic Naro village. They live in small bands, numbering from about 3 to 20 huts. And families generally moved around according to where water was. So they would follow the water. And they would have territories, but they weren't necessarily owned. There were loose boundaries, but people could go back and forth through these boundaries. And if someone could move into an area, and then they would be accepted as part of that clan. It was very easy to move back and forth into clans. However, in the 1700s, when the Bantu people came up with their ideas of pastoralism, that's when the original land loss and extermination started. Because pastoralism, all of a sudden their land was appropriated for cattle use. And cattle are very important in Bantu culture. They're highly prized, and And so a lot of the Bushman areas were kicked out of those areas with the good water so that the cattle could come in. Today, a lot of Naro Bushmen share the land with ranchers and herders. A lot of them work at cattle posts, and a lot of them work and help out on the cattle ranches. And it's actually been a way for, depending on the landowner, some of the landowners are actually quite good with the Bushmen that are living there. And I quote and say allowing them, which is a terrible way to put it, to live on their land. But it's a way that the Bushmen can still live out in the bush and not be forced into settlement areas. So they've had this sort of mutual relationship with some of the herders. Other ones have been quite terrible to the Bushmen that live there. So it really depends on the people that own the land itself. The other big thing is the loss of hunting rights. This is one of the elder healers. His name's Hanama. He's a wonderful healer. He is really an amazing man. And I estimate his age to be about 90, if I were to guess. And he says that during the old days, this is a quote from him, so I need to read. Let's say, during the old days, there used to be hunting with bows and arrows, and it was just so nice. But now it's a big matter. Now if they find us hunting in the bush, we are being kept by the police, and we are not allowed to hunt anymore. So we are struggling, and we are crying. So we need to be given that freedom for what we used to do in the past. The Bushmen are separated now from the wildlife areas by fences. That huge area I showed you, the size of Denmark, the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, was actually set up as a Bushman reserve. But yet they've been kicked out of that. And even though they went through the UN and a high court allowed them to be able to go back into that area, they weren't given their hunting rights back, which is akin to letting them starve. So not many have gone back. A couple quotes from the elders. This is a kudu, a male kudu. When I was young, the government came and just took the animals away from me without consulting me about what was supposed to be done. They just took it away from me. That's what I'm very sad about. And those animals, they were all over the place. When the government came and said they were taking away the animals from us, they even stopped us from hunting them. We were not allowed to hunt those animals. That was the main problem which I am having now. No, I'm not allowed to hunt.
Are they allowed to trap?
Yes, I'll get to that. I'll get to that. Yes, thank you, sweetheart. My son. So as I said about that with the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, in 2006, the Bushmen were actually, after they were expelled, they were allowed to go back in, but again, without hunting rights. And now still, hunting permits haven't been given to any of them. They are still allowed to trap, and this is actually a trapping set up to catch. They do a lot of snare trapping. There's not really much. You can't do deadfall traps there because there's nothing heavy. But they do a lot of snare trapping. This is trapping for francolin and guinea fowl, small birds. But the loss of hunting rights, of course, as all of you probably know, affects indigenous knowledge directly. So you don't just lose hunting, you lose rituals, you lose rites of passage, marriage rituals, all of these things that pass down from generation to generation. And other than hunting sort of shown in ecotourism settings, really none of it's done other than illegal hunting, which a lot of them still do. But if they're caught, there are huge consequences.
What?
Now in Botswana, the Bushmen have no right to live anywhere except for the settlements. So they're supposed to have water rights at local watering holes, but a lot of times other cattle owners come in and take over the watering holes. And they say to the Bushmen, "You're lowly, you go away, this is for our cattle because we're above you." When they, and also the cattle denude the areas around, if they go to a settlement area, then the areas around that are just denuded of cattle, so they can't even gather. They're usually given a couple of cows and a couple of goats, but then the lions, of course, come in and eat them. And, you know, other people that have that happen, the government gives them money to replace the animals, but the Bushmen say, well, we steal from the lions all the time. Of course they're going to come and eat our stuff. That's only fair. So they don't think to go and get their money for their cattle because it doesn't even cross their mind. It's just so out of their culture. When the Marshalls are very famous anthropologists, when they first went to Botswana in the 1950s, there was no alcohol consumption, very little disease, no personal violence, and very little. They did a study, actually, a very, very detailed study about disease. There was no cancer, there was no neurological diseases. None of that was happening. And now you're starting to see that with people in the settlements. Now, this history, like so many indigenous cultures, is so tragic. But there is some hope. And that's the story I'm going to continue and tell you tonight. The people with whom I work have decided to avoid settlement life. Some of them have gone and lived in settlements and then come back to the bush. Some have always been there and said, I don't want a part of it. And they live in an intentional community. There's no alcohol or drug use, zero. And complete families there are still living as close to the hunter-gatherer lifestyle as possible. They do still need some economic supplementation because of the hunting ban. Since they can no longer hunt, that leaves this gap that they need to fill. They need to buy meat. They need to get skins somehow. And so that gap right now is partially being filled by this idea of restorative ecotourism, by sharing their knowledge with people coming over. But it has to be done, of course, in a way that they have ownership of it, and they only share what they want to, and only people who want to share it do. And that's actually happening in this community, and that's the story I want to start with, or I want to get into tonight. So I want to tell a story about this wonderful, intentional community. As one of the elders named Kham in this community said, he said, you know, some of us, we try the settlement life. And we go out because we see these things you want. We see these things you have, and we want them. How could we not? But what problem is that when we go out and try to get these things that you have, we fall away. And that's why we turn to alcohol. Because we don't have the resilience that you have. We don't belong there. We belong staying in the bush as our culture always lived. And he's one of the leaders in this community. The story I'm going to tell now is about one particular family who was struggling with the influence of modernization. And this is an example of what I call restorative ecotourism in action. It's the story of Cacao. You know him. Yeah. Cacao is a Naro man. It's wonderful animated teacher. And when he started teaching his skills to people coming over from other countries who wanted to learn about the Bushman ways, none of his 6 children even knew how to start a fire by hand. None of his 6 children knew the ways of the bush. His oldest son, Duma, was 14, he's 27 now, was 14 years old and in a formal government school, which he quit, and was very, very unhappy. Cacao's older brother, Uta was an alcoholic living in a settlement. Uta is a very skilled tracker, one of the best trackers I've seen. Uta is a man that can be telling you about a track here. You think he's not, of course, listening to anything else, telling you about a track here, and you say, Uta, what happened? You know, way back there, I heard a bird alarm. And he'll tell you exactly what happened a long time ago, even though there's all this other stuff going on around him. He's so aware. And he was living, was an alcoholic, and his children were not learning the ways of the bush either. They were growing up without knowing any of their traditional knowledge. Now, this is Uta on the right and Cacao on the left. Duma on the right. He's 27 years old. He works as an indigenous guide, and he knows the knowledge of his elders so well. He's married with 3 children, and his children live in the bush, and they're growing up as his father did and his grandfather did. His kids are now growing up learning their indigenous knowledge as they would have in the past in this intentional community. They're learning through community cultural mentoring, which I know a lot of people here have gone to Art of Mentorings, and it's really wonderful to see this in action with the Bushmen. The uncle, Uta, lives in the bush. He doesn't touch alcohol at all. His children have also relearned the ways of the bush, and they're also now living back in the bush and relearning the ways of their elders. Uta has a brand new baby who's growing up in the bush. Here he is setting a snare trap. This one, I think, for birds as well. And now, when this tourism started, Cacao's kids couldn't even light a fire by hand. Now his children are all even quicker than he is. When the tourism first started, and this community very intentionally went into this. This is an intentional thing for them. Cacao said, when asked, why don't you teach your children the ways of the bush? He said, why would I teach it to them? They're not even going to use it anymore. This disjunction was widespread. Now there's hope, revitalization in these communities, and they have intense pride in themselves. They've always been told when you're told over and over and over again, you're nothing. You are nothing. You are the lowest of the low. Your knowledge holds no value. None of us here can imagine that, because we hold, I think most of you, as I do, hold these Bushmen in high esteem as being the first peoples and having wonderful, amazing knowledge that we just can't imagine them losing. But they've been told over and over again, especially in the schools and the formalized schooling, that they are nothing.
Are people being racist now?
Yes, sweetie.
Isn't that illegal?
No.
Is it illegal here?
No.
It isn't? Being racist isn't illegal here?
It's not illegal, it's just wrong.
I thought there's a fine.
We can talk later, sweetheart. This is my son who's asking me a lot of questions, right? Anyway, but now it's really wonderful to see these revitalization in these communities. They have great pride in themselves. Their heritage, you can really see in the short period of time. Now they're really proud of sharing their culture instead of hiding it as they used to. There's pride instead of shame. They've told us over and over again that our coming to learn about their culture gives them the sense of value and pride. And they also know now that we tell them, they always say, the people you bring are so happy. And we say, yeah, but they're happier when they leave. And I just lost my train of thought, sorry. And and only members of the community who want to join us do. When we show up, it's actually, you might think, well, what if some people don't want to do this from the community? What if they don't want to come? Actually, the people that don't come also shared anything that is made to help supplement because of that hunting ban. And actually, they have this thing that the people that don't go actually get more, which will help encourage them maybe to come the next time. And when we show up, there are so many people from across the lands that want to come visit us. We actually have to limit it. So it's not a problem. It's not a question of only a few people want to come and they're reluctant about us. When we show up, and is John here yet? Come back down. when we show up this year, we got there, and our plane, our little charter flight, we first cleared the runway of animals, just a long sand runway, and then we went to land. And before we got there, the people that were with us said, I talked about the customs and about what to expect and what to do and how to behave, and I said, you know, will they be there to meet us? And I said, well, they don't usually meet us there. We usually arrive, and then later they come out and they'll meet us out in the bush. And one of the women said, are they huggers? You know, how do you greet them? And I told her how to do the greeting, atuo, how to greet the Bushmen. And I said, they're not usually huggers. They'll sit right next to you when you're around the fire, and that could be in the middle of the day when it's 120 degrees out. They always have a fire. Right next to you, and there's a lot of touching. They don't hug. We got off that plane this year, and we stepped out, and there were 30 Bushmen waiting to meet us, singing us in, welcoming us with so much love and joy. We got this wall of love and affection and connection coming out at us. And all of us burst into tears. And they were crying as well. They were so excited that we were there and welcomed us in with song. I went around and, of course, greeted everyone by name. They're like family now. And one of them gave that woman a big hug. That was so fantastic. So they really do want to share this knowledge. They're so excited about having pride in their culture. And they said, we know that you come to us because your culture is in trouble. And we know that you come to us, we know now, they didn't know this originally, we know now that you come to us because your culture's in trouble and you need to learn from us about what culture is to bring that back to your people. Yeah. You know, 6 years ago even, they weren't saying that. There's been big shifts that have occurred. Let's talk a little about some other things. What do they eat? Yeah. There's always, as I said, there's always a fire. You'll be wandering through the bush and going and looking at plants and doing things, and all of a sudden you plop down and there's always a fire to sit around. And very small fire, and then out of their hunting kit, it's a little dark, but I do have a hunting kit here. Whoop, there goes the spear. Out of the hunting kit, they will just pour out all of this food that they've been collecting the whole time. It's amazing how much food you can collect in a short period of time. One of the foods that sama melons really get them through the dry period. It's a real extender when the rainy season ends. Sama melons, some other deep tubers are able to provide enough water to get them through that really, really dry season. Maramba beans are another. Here are some we collected. Last year, we just helped them collect bushels of maramba beans. They were everywhere. They store really well. This past year, there were a lot of rains, and the marambas didn't do so well, so they had to rely on the things that they had collected the year before. They're high in protein as well. Other protein sources include a lot of insects. Jewel beetles, they just, as they're walking along, they take them off the acacia trees, pull their legs off, put them in the bag. Moon moths, the larvae, I don't know if you can see here, it's like a neon green when you pierce it. They eat the moon moths, and then they take the cocoon and they put seeds in it. Whoops. And they put seeds in it.
I untied them.
And this is what the men then wear around their legs for dancing. And it also helps to get the rhythm going when there's going to be a trance dance.
Rocks or seeds?
Seeds. There's not really many rocks there. It depends what area you're in, but this community has there's very few rocks where they are. I brought them a
turtle.
is Jeff Fisher here? Jeff gave me a piece of obsidian, and Canadian Jim gave me another piece. And I brought them obsidian a couple years ago, and they were so excited. They'd never seen anything that's so hard. I remember Uta looked at it and said, "You can do everything with this."
Yeah. Do they still have it?
A piece of
or did the
obsidian
sellers
antler.
take it?
And, they used it that day, and then I'm sure it just we didn't change the culture, because I'm sure it just as everything, things don't stay with them. You have everything you need on the land. So I'm sure it was put down somewhere. And someday someone's going to walk through the Kalahari and find a piece of obsidian and think, what is that? And anyway, other animals like the tortoise. This tortoise will be eaten, and then the larger tortoises are used for plates, and the smaller ones the women wear around their neck and put certain sedges that have a really one that they pound for perfume in that. And then they'll take this tail of a spring hare, which is a small, it looks like a kangaroo, but it's a rodent, and they'll take the tail of it and put it in the top as a powder for themselves after. And then they cook everything in the ash of the fire, and all food shared. They also eat a lot of tubers, and this also helps to get them through the dry season. This is Dabakai. A couple people got a necklace from her. The necklace I put in the auction, that she made that. She has a wild potato here. This is Naisa. Naisa is the medicine woman. And here she's dug a tuber called a kumbrua. It's like a radishy type thing. It's very, very water filled. It can go to the size of a person. And then they replant the top. But when you're walking through the Kalahari, you think, there is nothing out here. There is no food at all. And all of a sudden, there'll be a little thing under a little leaf under this bush, under this shrub, and this will come up. And this will come up. And before you know it, you've just been wandering for an hour, and you've got a meal for the entire community.
Awesome. And for the poison.
This is the peeling of the kumbrua. They eat this particular one raw. Here you can see some wildebeest meat here. This is the cow I was talking about earlier. This is his wife. This is Koba. And when he asked her to marry him, I don't know if anyone saw the other day, I had them on my blanket, and I can't see here.
I brought it down and put it back up.
Anyway, that's a love bow, and it's a very small bow.
It's right here.
Oh, thanks, sweetheart.
Can I say it? Please.
And
you
want to say it? Okay.
Yeah.
Stand up. My son really wants to share this with you all.
Yeah,
I'll be the woman.
I said it a bunch.
Okay.
Okay. So you take get the person's attention, and this is basically like one of their traditional marriage thing. You take an arrow. There's also a mini hunting set. Don't ask to buy, it's on hold. Take an arrow.
Son Colton, those who haven't met him.
You take it, and the Bushmen would shoot it at their feet.
And then if the woman
picks it up, it's a yes for marriage.
That means yes. It's a very simple marriage ceremony.
It's on hold, so don't ask.
Thank you, sweetheart. And that's how Kakao asked Kobo to marry him. Yeah, I just love that little tale. But other things that are extremely important, of course, hunting and trapping. And that's why they're so amazing at bird language and tracking. They're the ultimate trackers. The Bushmen are so aware of everything going around them, like that Uta was telling that story of when he was doing one thing, but he was so aware of absolutely everything else going on in the bush. And I think some of you have been doing the bird language mornings here. When you live in a place where there's things that can eat you everywhere, you are so aware of everything around you. And you need to be, otherwise you don't survive. The women are really amazing at bird language. This is some glossy starlings harassing an African harrier hawk here. The women have to know bird language so well. They're alone on the land, gathering with very small children. And there are leopards and lions and black mambas and all sorts of things out there. And so the women, first of all, they tell very scary stories to their children, like really scary stories about being dragged away from the fire by hyenas, sort of stories, things that happen.
Zombies.
But it's very important for them that they tell them that at a young age, and it keeps those kids alert. A couple of years ago, I remember we had so many children with us. We were walking through the bush with like 20 some odd kids, little kids from little toddlers up through teenagers, and adults as well. We were walking through the bush, and it was silent. Now, I can't imagine even just walking through the bush with like my kids and it being silent.
I won't.
Imagine that. Total silence. But yet, when we got to a place where it was safe, then the joking and the loudness and the fun and everything happened as it would anywhere else. But that absolute silence is so necessary in order for survival. And the birds will tell you everything. They'll tell you where there's a snake in the grass, if there's a lion over here, there's a mongoose, all by the different sounds and by the different birds. And and the other thing, of course, is the tracking. The Bushmen are amazing trackers. We do a lot of tracking with them when we're there. We really focus in on that because it's such an important skill and such a base level skill to have. As far as hunting, they use very small bows. Yeah, let's see. This is a full-size hunting bow. This is it.
Can I see where they get the poison?
Full size. Could you stand up and hold that? You can hold that.
Yeah, can I see where they get the poison?
No, listen. Okay. It's a full-size hunting bow. I'm going to show you the arrows that go along with that. Let's see. Here we go. The arrows that go along with that, you can see this one came apart. They are 3-part arrows. 1, 2, 3. In the past, now the community here, the intentional community, they just share everything. In the past, a different family would own a different part of the arrow. And so that meat would be just, everyone would have done their part to help provide. But they're very, very small, and this is a very small bow, so they rely on stealth and tracking and being able to get very close to an animal. They can take down a giraffe with this. And the reason they can do that is through this poison. Here they're digging at the base of an acacia tree very, very deeply. Thanks, we're good. And this is the larva of a Diamphidia beetle. And the larva is so poisonous that if you have a cut in your hand and it gets on it, you die. There's no antidote, so they're very, very careful. When they place, I don't know if you can see these. Can you see them better up here? When they place the poison, they actually don't even put it on the tip of the arrow because they might nick themselves by mistake. They put it just behind here. And so when it goes into the animal, then the nick will be initially made and the poison will be able to get into the animal itself.
How does it not get into the food?
And then they will track that animal until it has fallen down. Now if they get an animal, they generally just wait. They might camp for the night and wait till the next day and then find it. And then once they find that animal, if it's not already, if it hasn't died yet, they'll take, again, it's a very small, they'll take the spear and finish it off.
What about the meat? Does it get infected?
No, the meat does not get infected. It's a good question. Yeah.
The metal that's
So they used to use bone. The question is the metal on there, where do they get that? Often, so they used to use bone, then they started trading for metal. Now they mostly get it off fence posts and then pound it out. Yep. Yeah. This is showing the arrow, putting the poison on, smearing it on here. And then the men always have their hunting set with them. And in it is their hunting set, their fire sticks, their digging stick, and their walking stick at all times. This is Hanuma the healer again.
Can the healer heal you from the poison?
I don't know, sweetheart. That's a great question. You asked all the hard ones right here. He's a really great healer, though. And these are the fire sticks. They're very different than the ones we use here. You can see they're the same size. They're from, this is a complete set and this is a complete set, from the same wood. This one's just been finished. And it's from a tree called the comifera, the common corkwood. And so they start with one being the fireboard and one being female and one being the male, and then when this one's full up, they'll just switch it. We showed them a bow drill a few years ago. Is Robin in the audience? Probably had to put his son to bed.
It's a really funny story.
He was with us, and Robin Bliss Wagner was with us a couple years ago, and he made a bow drill set to show them. And he was showing them the bow drill set, and Luta was just, he couldn't contain himself. He ran away because he was laughing so hard. He said, why would you use that? There's so many parts to it. It's all about
That's not how he said it. That's not how Robin said it.
It's all about simplicity for them. It's all about simplicity. Why would you make cordage and make an extra piece and do all that when you just have a hand drill? It doesn't make any sense. You have your tree, you can just get it off, you make yourself a set, and you're good to go. So they also do a lot of trapping. So they use often the gum from the acacia tree to attract birds. They'll trap pretty large antelope. They'll go for the watering paths, the paths for the watering holes, and set very large snare traps for the antelope to come through. I had a video here, but it wasn't quite working. I might be able to show it to you afterwards. They actually love to act out what actually happens. They're really dramatic and they're very funny, and they really enjoy acting out the scenarios. Like around the fire at night, they'll just tell wonderful stories. If one of our group, I don't know, has anything slightly odd about them, that will be acted out over and over and over again. And also they'll just tell things right away. There's no keeping something in. When you live in a community like that, right, so close, you can't hold on to something. You can't keep it tight and say, oh, we'll talk about that tomorrow. You hear a lot of, and you hear this, and the fingers start going, and they're telling you exactly what they think of what they just did. And it gets all right out there, and there's no holding anything back. And it's not taken as, there's no sort of defense mechanism. That doesn't exist. It's just all out there, and you tell people things right away in order so nothing builds up. This is a successful, we went trapping for spring hare this day, the kangaroo-like rodent, and by placing snares at their live in burrows at their holes. And we caught a couple spring hare that particular day.
Yummy.
Water is the other big thing. The Kalahari is very dry, of course, and during the rainy season there's plentiful water, but when it dries up, the tubers are a really huge source of water, as I mentioned. The salmon melon's another very big source. Also, they often sip from sip wells, which are just areas in trees and other areas that they're able to dig out. And this is a plant actually called kalenko that acts as a straw in order to sip out the water. They also store water in ostrich eggs. They'll take the ostrich eggs, and they'll fill them with water and then bury them at the base of a bush. And then put little sticks, kind of like that trap I showed. They'll put little sticks around it so the jackals and things won't hopefully get in there, won't see it. And they'll bury it very deep. And then they mark the top of the bush with a bunch of grass called Bushman grass. They just take the grass and put it at the top. You can see the top. If you know what you're looking for and you're lost in the Kalahari and you look around, you can spot grass on top of that bush from really far away. So then the Bushmen know that that's a watering point and that they can go there and they can get water. They also have a tuber called the bee, which they dig out and pound. And they go like this and use their thumb as a spout and put a little of the liquid in their mouth as they squeeze the pulp. And it suppresses thirst. So when they're going on long hunts, they often use that to be able to get through the long hunts or through the dry season. The ostrich eggshells that break are made into, if you can't see tonight, you can come tomorrow. The ones that break are made into jewelry.
Wow.
And I'll be giving, tomorrow morning, if anyone wants to come, I'll have a blanket out, and I'll have you can try all this stuff out. And you can also try making an ostrich eggshell bead. See how much work it goes into making something like this. So, and this has porcupine quills on it. The porcupine quills there are about 1 foot long. They play a lot of games, especially the adults. Yeah. The children often watch the adults playing games. I know it sounds very strange, right? But the adults, this is a melon tossing game. It's got wonderful music to it, and there's a certain rhythm, and the women toss the melon back, and then you catch it, and then you go around, and it's dancing to this particular beat. It's a really fun game. There's skipping games that they use. They tan the hide of an eland into a big jump rope, and do skipping games. They do games to practice their aim, throwing games that the teenagers will still play with them as well. But it's mostly the adults playing the games and the kids watching. I remember watching a mother making a kind of a quote-unquote dollhouse. She was making a house that was just like their homes, their huts, like this one here. She was making it out of a small, in a little area, a replica of one. And her kids kept trying to help her, and she kept pushing them away. And then they kept trying to help her, and she kept pushing them away. What she's doing is she's showing them exactly how it's supposed to be done. And then I noticed a little later, they were making their own over here. So that is a way of demonstrating to them how things are done. But the games, it's a really great way for community to come together, to be able to have that release. I know when we as adults play games, especially ones where we're running around or doing things or have music with them and singing with them, it's a real release. And if you live in an area where you're with the same people all the time, that's really important. The children also are involved with moving on to dancing now. The children also are involved with the dancing and the rhythms. There's a lot of music. I have a video I'll show you after this. I tried to put it in the presentation and it didn't quite work. But the old women, will stand up and they're so lithe and will dance. We did a lot of music with them this year. We actually had a lot of musicians on the trip this year. And we brought instruments, and we sang just our voices, and we sang wonderful songs with them. And it was so much fun this year we always do music, so to just have a plethora of music, and especially they really love the fast songs. They really love singing to them and dancing to them and moving. And to see these women probably in their 80s and 90s just up there just laughing and smiling and moving just with such grace and joy is really something to see. Okay. That's the video I can't play you. Sorry. They also do a lot of trance dancing. The trance dance is a real healing. It's a healing dance. It's not only healing for the community, but I also do healings for people who are ill. I've seen really amazing transformations happen to people at a trance dance. A friend of mine had hurt his feet and ankle to the point where he couldn't walk. It had been a year. He'd been out on safari and he came home. He's a guide, and he was using a cane, and he'd been to every doctor, Western and Eastern. No one could figure it out, and he could barely walk, and he was just gaining weight and doing really terribly. And he finally went to see Hanama, the healer. And after 2 sessions with him, of Hanama manipulating his foot and pulling that pain out of him and giving him medicine and herbs, 3 days later he was fine, and he hasn't had any pain yet since. It's been 2 years now. in the trance dance himself, that's what I was playing when you first got here, the sounds of that trance dance. There's no hallucinogens. It's all done by gathering in a circle, usually the women sitting and the men dancing around, though often the women will feel, if they feel it, will get up and dance with the men. It's all about rhythm. It's the women singing. It's the women clapping. It's the men with the rattles around their leg going around the fire. It helps that healer go into a trance. Everyone in that circle puts their energy to that healer. And then that healer is able to pull down the healing spirit that then moves through him. The way I picture it, and I had a very clear vision of it this last time, is there's a spider web of people below, with all this connectivity. And then there's a funnel going up to the sky. And then there's another big spider web up top. And there's this huge layer of connection. And that rope, it's often called, I don't know if any of you read Bradford Keeney's work, Ropes to God. That funnel is where Hanuma, the healer, is able to talk to the ancestors and pull down the healing that goes through him, called the Num, that moves through him and then can go out to other people. When he drops into that trance, you can look there, he's no longer there. There's no Hanuma. We had someone with us one year who sees auras very well, and he decided to peek in and see Hanuma's aura when he was in a trance. And he said he looked in, and he had to look out because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And he looked in again, and all he could see was the Kalahari. There was no Hanuma. He wasn't even present. It was the Kalahari and the animals and the land, everything swirling around as one. And it was a man who had no aura because he was one with everything. And when he puts his hands on you and he stands over you and his sweat is pouring down on your head, it feels like pure just electricity and energy running over you. And he is such a healing spirit, and he pulls from you, and he takes the pain on. He pulls from you and the other members of his community that pain away. He sees the black spots and pulls them away and throws them. The women sometimes help and come and suck things out of you and spit them out. And the dance, they had stopped doing that trance dance for a while. They used to sort of trance dance at the drop of a hat. 4 times a week they trance dance. And they started losing that tradition. And with us, they don't do it for many people who come, but they always trance dance with us. Usually a couple of times. And it's been really good to see that coming more back to their community, and they said they're doing it more now. It's sort of, there's this resurgence. This healer now who had sort of lost his place a little bit in the community because they weren't doing as many trance dances, and they just weren't, and he was therefore not looked upon as the great man that he was. Now that they're doing more, and he's been healing so many people, he's brought back to reverence in the community. He himself has changed. He used to be sort of a little bit grumpy and that sort of thing. He is this pure, he's just full of light and joy. His eyes are sparkling at all times. He's the most sort of ethereal man you could possibly meet. And most of that community is like that now. The trance dancing in that community it's a way for them to talk to their ancestors, and he often talks to his mother. And it's a way for them to come together and heal not just their bodies, but their spirits. Post-trance dance, women go and dig whatever the medicine is. Again, this is Naisa. She's often the one who goes off and digs, because she's the medicine woman. This particular plant is to help in ways of love. This is one that actually has been, you may have heard of, called devil's claw. It's different than the devil's claw we have here. But it pretty much heals everything. Sort of joint pain, blood cleaner. It's their all-around herb. But there's so many things on the land. I mean, their land is their pharmacy, their land is their grocery, their land is everything to them. So we have a lot to learn from the Kalahari Bushmen, especially in the ways they raise their children in community. The parent's job is to love their children. That's it. It's not to discipline their children. It's not to teach their children. In our society, we have to take all of those roles on as parents. You know, as a parent, that's a lot to take on, to have all of those roles for your children. But in this community, the parents only have to love. There's aunties and uncles and Grammies and grandpas and cousins and everyone around who just takes those roles up. And I see this. I see the uncle teaching his nephew. I see the auntie teaching her niece. And it's such a joy for the parents to be able to release all that discipline and teaching and just do that for other people's kids, the ones that they connect with, the ones that see their gifts, right? Because you might not be the best person to teach a child, but someone else connects with them and sees their gifts and therefore is able to do that. And they do that so well. So much I could say, but I'll open it up for some questions. But I do want to say that gatherings like this, like Buckeye, that bring our local traditional knowledge back to all of us in these modern times, these last skills are really important to remember and relearn. I mean, we all know this. It brings community together. It brings us closer to nature, closer to community, closer to ourselves. And through all those things, brings us closer to hopefully rebuilding a culture. Kind of don't have a culture anymore. But by doing all those things, connecting to ourselves and each other and nature, we're able to hopefully start rebuilding that culture. Maybe not something that is exactly like theirs, but hopefully something that kind of emulates it. So much to say, but that's the program for today.